In this edition of Roots and Reflections, we continue our visit in the Israeli desert town of Arad with artist Rick Winicki. Rick Winicki came to Israel from Canada 35 years ago. He served in the Israeli army and was a resident of the Samaria settlement of Kadim. Rick and his family lost their home in that settlement under Ariel Sharon's redeployment from Gaza and 4 communities in Samaria in 2005. Subsequently, the Winickis acquired their new home and art studio in Arad. Here, Rick created his flagship bronze and stone monument, Fountain of Tears, that focuses on the unprecedented connection of the 7 last sayings of Yeshua on the cross with the Nazi Holocaust inflicted on the Jewish people. Truly a revolutionary concept. So as we leave this conflict of opposites, we move into the next panel here.
This piece in particular for me was a real struggle because it's the word from the crucifixion is, mother, this is your son, son, this is your mother. And from a New Testament point of view, this is historically, the figure of Jesus is speaking directly to his mother and to John, the only one of his apostles, say, that stayed for the whole crucifixion. And so in a sense, in the crucifixion, the hands are together, his head is looking down. It's almost like he's wooing these 2 relationships to come together. And in a way, he's saying to John, I want you to carry her. I want you to bear her. Here in the folds of the cloth, I didn't know what to do because I'm thinking this is directly to 2 individuals. How does it reflect the Holocaust? Is there a reflection somehow? So I started to sculpt in the clay. In the beginning part of this piece, the figure representing the Holocaust is carrying this heavy mantle. But as I started to do the folds within this cloth, I created a really surrealistic looking woman's figure where her feet, her legs, her back all go over his shoulders. The head's here, the arms are interwoven into the cloth. And the end of the cloth ends up in his hand and he's focusing on that. Because I started to realize that a Holocaust survivor carries the memory of the dead with him everywhere he goes. It's almost like this has been a mantle that's been put on him. Because I thought when Jesus spoke to Mary and to John, what he was doing in his suffering, he was creating a relationship that is not natural. Because she wasn't naturally his mother and John wasn't naturally her son. And in the same sense, the survivors at the end of the war, they've lost, in a way, the majority of the people who were naturally related to them.
That's right. And
had this mantle of those that they never knew before placed on them. The memory that I'm a survivor, 1 out of 6 million that died within this catastrophe, becomes an identification of a relationship that's now put on him that's completely unnatural to him before.
Now I have to ask you this because this is the first time I've really noticed the details in his face. It's almost like somebody you met or you know. How did you come about, in brief, in terms of this face?
I've been working as a sculptor now for about 25 years, and I realize that when I'm working on a piece, if I don't have a model, the tendency is the piece starts to look like me, which it can be scary sometimes. But I went to the photo archives at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, and they have 2.5 million pictures from the Holocaust that they've archived into their system. You can sit in front of a computer screen and go through pictures after pictures. And I did that for about 2.5 hours one day looking for a face. And all of a sudden at one point there was a half-body photograph comes up on the screen, but it was this full face of obviously someone from the camps. He had like a blanket over him, but he was in the striped clothes. And I thought, this is the face. This is going to be the model. And it's like, it's like the sense is I started to use this one expression within this photocopied picture for the face, for the entire, basically it was almost a full year of sculpting the figures in the clay. But then later, my first visit to Auschwitz, I'm sitting through the 15-minute documentary that they have. The last part is the liberation of Auschwitz, right. Russian footage. But within that footage, I'm sitting there watching it in the audience, and all of a sudden the camera spans over on a group of prisoners, then specifically one guy standing there, and it was my guy. And I looked at the face, just like what you're saying. When you create, I had one picture of one expression, but the sense of forlornness, the sense you had to always somehow imbue it into the clay, and you began to learn every line, every part, every bit of the structure of his face, so that when I recognized this face within this film, it freaked me out totally, because it was like somebody I knew really well, but I didn't know his name. But all of a sudden, I discover that he survived, whoever he was. And so now, over the last couple of years, I'm trying to search out through the archives in Auschwitz if we can track down who he was, what his name was, what happened to him.
Terrorism can strike in Israel at any time, whether in the form of a suicide bombing or the regular and sustained rocket attacks still continuing, targeted from Gaza. Through the ministry of the Joseph Storehouse, we can respond quickly and bring help and relief to the victims of these terror attacks. We provide vital medical and emergency supplies to some of the frontline hospitals responding to these attacks. We are also able to supply humanitarian aid to those deeply affected. Your giving to this ministry enables us to respond quickly and effectively. Would you call the number on the screen or go online to roots4u.tv and give today? Or why not become a monthly partner with us, and together we can touch the lives of the victims of terror and rocket attacks across Israel and bring relief to those who need it most. Thank you.
The next panel, for me, out of the 7 words, the 7 last words is the strongest. It seems to be the center, and in a way it's the one that protrudes out from the wall the most, because the sense on the word is, my God, why have you forsaken me? When I started to touch the crucifixion, I started to think, okay, this is Jesus who has understood the presence of the Father like no one ever will. All of a sudden, within his suffering, the Son is crying, looking for the Father. Everything is going upward. The hands are nailed, but the fingers are curled. The head is exaggerated. It's thrown back. The lips are open. And in a sense, within the figure, it's like it's his last breath. The last thing Jesus ever could have imagined within his suffering, not being able to find the Father. So the cry goes up. The figure that represents the Holocaust, the difference within this figure is he's the only one that has his back turned. And in a sense, his cry is the same. It's almost like the face mirrors the crucifixion in a way. He's also looking for his last breath. Because in doing the research with this, I discovered within a book, it was recorded historically by Sonderkommandos, those that closed the doors in the gas chambers, the words, some of the words, all the cries, all the prayers, the screams that they heard in the beginning 10 minutes before the gas started to take effect on those inside, it was repeated over and over again, the cries in Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Wow. When I read that, that so flipped me. Because I didn't know that these words were spoken in any other place other than Jesus out of his crucifixion. And to discover that it was in Psalms, but then to discover that it was a repetitive cry from within the gas chambers, it totally flipped me. So this is why, creatively, I felt like because the word is so verbatim to both the Holocaust and the crucifixion, the crucifixion had to be visually almost the same, where you see the head representing Jesus crucified. The head is shaved, but in this piece, I put a number on the arm to represent that third place of memory for a survivor. I decided to use 4 digits. It could have been longer, could have been shorter. But I've told people, for me, out of the 7 years of all the emotions and all the tears and everything attached to creating this, putting a number, a tattooed number, on a figure representing Jesus crucified was the worst moment for me out of the whole process. Because there's so much memory for a survivor attached to that number.
Well, and Jesus himself was a prisoner of the Roman army.
Right.
So.
And forever marked with that sense. The 5th word is the word I thirst. In touching the crucifixion, the body is draining. Everything is going down. There's sort of a down motion to the place of the crucifixion. Because I thought to myself, if Jesus, his whole life, has declared himself to be living water, and that if any man comes to him and drinks, he won't be thirsty anymore, for him to say now in his suffering, I thirst, must mean that there's nothing more for him to give. Everything has been poured out. And so the fingers are surreal, everything is being pulled down. We've tried to also bring the feet in a way to a point where it's almost like the last drop, the last tear. In touching the figure representing the Holocaust, is that the sense of thirst historically for those within the camps was that they could survive for a long time on small pieces of bread, but if they didn't have water to drink, they were dead within 24 hours.
Wow.
So the identification is 2 parts. The one hand is almost touching the feet, but not quite, that last tear, that last drop. And in a sense, an identification from a natural point of view to the place of thirst. But the other hand is on the ground and it's cupped. Because I wanted the sense that there's a spiritual aspect to the word thirst, where he's now looking for the water that will touch his inner thirst also. So it's a twofold communication within the piece.
This channel of water, are you recycling water? What's happening with this?
Now, for us, when we got to the point of dealing with the element of water and the reflection of tears from within these verses within Jeremiah, we thought to ourselves in the beginning how to recycle this. But then the idea came that we wanted the water to be dripping like tears, but then they'd be collected here. It would be then channeled, go into a pipe, and then we dug pipes out to the outside of the courtyard.
Wow.
That in a way, each one of the water sources from the 6 pillars then becomes a feeder or an irrigator for 6 olive trees that we planted on the outside.
For the 6 million.
To represent life, the prayer over the Lord wanting to redeem the number 6 million. So it's a sense of that reflection of the intercession within tears being carried to a place where it gives life then and rooted in the land. And the cool thing with it is that if you look in the Negev, to see a tree, you know it's had to have been intentional, that the tree's been planted there. So it's that whole meaning of life coming from these tears. The 6th word is the word, it is finished. It's complete. I wanted within the crucifixion, the face is intentional. It's a sense of declaration. But visually, I wanted the nails in the hands to be covered by the fingers. And in a way, Jesus is declaring this now to be over. It's done. The figure that represents the Holocaust, in the same way, he's covering his face. And the one hand is in the air, almost like it's looking for direction, but it's floating. There is no direction. Because I looked at it and I thought the word finished, something being brought to a completion. For the Jewish people, 1945 was the end, was the finish of their suffering within the Holocaust. But I looked at it and I thought, what they said, what they discovered, the liberating armies, those within the camps, they were almost like walking dead. A lot of them couldn't remember their own names, but they could remember the number tattooed on their arms. So they had to bring them back mentally and physically to a point that if you're trying to understand your own humanness after it's been taken from you within these camps, you have to touch a place of memory. And for those that were mentally able, physically able, they started to go back to these little shtetls, these little villages, say in Poland, to reattach themselves to points of memory, to become human again in a way. But historically, it's recorded that when these prisoners, these Jews, leaving the camps, go back to the villages, were not received by these Gentiles now that have taken over everything that belonged to them. They weren't received with any kind of sympathy. They were received with rage.
Wow.
And what happened historically, there was a whole series of pogroms all through Poland, all through the Ukraine, and over 25,000 that survived the camps, survived all the nightmare of the Holocaust, end up being killed in front of their own house by their own neighbors. No one wanted the Jews before the war. No one wanted them after the war. And the only country, it wasn't even a country, the only space in the world that wanted them was then Palestine. And the British were doing everything they could to block that.
The Bible teaches us that as we bless Israel, God will bless us. Now is your opportunity to be a blessing to Israel and to God's chosen people. By giving to the work of Roots and Reflections, not only do you enable us to continue to bring you this program, but also your gift does far more. It supports our humanitarian work on the ground in the Holy Land amongst both Jews and Arabs. And it helps us to continue to educate you, your friends and family, and the body of Christ worldwide on the significance of Israel and the place she plays in the heart of God. Would you consider giving a one-time donation today or becoming a monthly partner with this ministry? Roots and Reflections rely on your partnership to help us to continue to broadcast this message. Please call the number on the screen now or go to our website at rootsforyou.tv. Become a partner with us and bless the nation of Israel.
So we see here then, this is like the final act of desperation.
In a way, there's no act of desperation, there's collapse. Because I looked at it and I thought those that could no longer go back to their own homes, they had to go somewhere. So where did they go? Some of the survivors that we've met and have talked to actually had to go back to the same camps. They became refugees for the next 3 years within these camps. And I looked at the figure because the word from the crucifixion is, into your hands I commend now my spirit. So the crucifixion, it's all a situation now of death. Death is settled. It's almost like Jesus has no more to give. All has been given and death settles on him. Whereas the Holocaust almost in a way goes into a place of burial. Because between 1945 and 1948, for those that survived, the figure interwoven into the cloth, in a way, it's like those that survived, those that perished are buried together. The figure represents this cloak of memory of those that died, but the hands of that figure within the folds are going up. And in a way, it shows the relationship of a survivor that feels always compelled to remember those that died. And so in a way, it's almost like those that died are saying to those that survived, into your hands. We give our spirit, we give our memory. Because I look at it and I think, what I've seen that's really characteristic of Holocaust survivors, they're constantly compelled to remember those that died. This is why there's museums, there's movies, there's poetry, there's artwork, there's all these things, because I feel like there's a certain drive within survivors to remember those that died.
Now suddenly we arrive at a baby, a child.
Yeah.
Almost in a, well, basically like a fetal position.
Exactly. See, for me, everything within the wall that you see was 7 years of trying to process through two relationships, two personalities of suffering. And so what you're looking at, I didn't then know that it would have a relationship to the wall, but what you're looking at is a child, like what you said, in a fetal position, but he's finding himself in the last stage of the whole killing process. He's within the crematorium on the inside. But a sense, again, the place of abandonment and being completely cut off.
Oh.
On this side, what you see is an exact copy of the crematorium doors from Birkenau, Auschwitz. All the children from Terezin, they all perished within these crematoriums specifically. So I knew I had to do an exact copy of the doors from Birkenau. But what you also see is the arm of the child is going through this closed door, and the hand of the child is clutching a small piece of ground that's just outside of the door. The small piece of ground symbolizes Israel, the land, the place of a nation. But like the land, the butterfly is reflected in the butterfly within the poem that the child never ever sees. It's the hand of the child possesses the land, it belongs to him, but like the butterfly, he can't see it and he can't feel it because it's just outside of the reach of his hand. But I looked at this and I thought, if there's an identification within the suffering, there's a reflection of identification to death within both parts. And in a way, I'm an artist, so I can stretch stuff a little bit. But it's like Jesus, when he was buried for 3 days. The Jewish people were buried for 3 years, between 45 and 48. And I thought to myself, if there's a reflection within death, also within burial, there's a place of resurrection. And within this piece, it's the beginning of the physical attachment to the land. It's like the beginning of resurrection for them as a nation. The final piece is the sense of both of these personalities that have been involved within this dialogue of suffering. Both are half-body. Both are coming out of the stones that represent the perished. And in a way, they're finding each other. They're finally recognizing each other. They come into this place of embrace, but they both find each other under the shadow of the cup of suffering, but now it's empty. Both, in a sense, it has this created space of a fellowship of suffering that both identify with, both understand it, and in a way, it creates an acknowledgement of each other somehow within it. So it has this place of embrace.
Wow. It almost is parallel to even the dry bones of Ezekiel.
Exactly.
The whole
The
concept.
2 parts. The physical. See, I look at it and I see physical relationship, physical resurrection going on here, but relational resurrection within this piece itself.
Now, you have groups that come here and visit. When an Israeli Jew comes, or any Jewish person, and hears and observes this, what is their reaction?
The thing that we found that's really been in common is that there's always a sense of shock when they come in. There was one Israeli businesswoman who almost passed out on us because she said, I can't breathe. She said, you've taken the 2 hardest things in our history and put them at the same table. And I look at it and I think, they begin to teach us now. Because they walk in and within their reactions, we've had groups of Holocaust survivors, we've had Israeli children's classrooms, groups with teachers, we've had Israeli business guys, people involved in politics. Always there seems to be the common thread of shock first, and then it's a sense of, how did you get to this? There's this sense, obviously, of this massive curiosity, right? And they're like, all of a sudden, the shock of having this presented to them, they get over that enough to go then to the artist, which they start to dissect a little bit. They can hear in my Hebrew that you're from outside the country because of your accent. How long have you been here? Have you done the army? Have your kids done the army? All of these things, they run down through the list. And in a way, once they see that you're enough of a part of who they are, they say to you, okay, tell me what you were thinking when you went through the process. And I always tell them, in a way, I've only walked through a process because of my relationship with Jesus. I said, I can only create out of that place. I have a relationship to this land over the 30 years, to those survivors that I've known. So out of that relationship, I try and create an element of identification within that, but also within the crucifixion of my relationship within that place of knowing Jesus. And so they go, okay, that's a little hard for us to swallow, but okay, what? What were you thinking? And you start to walk through parts of the process, it always gets me. It's like, they sit there quietly, which has always flipped me with a group of Israelis. They don't interrupt and they don't try and tell you really what it is and not what you're saying. But it's like there's this concept of fascination, and it's them that have been exactly the opposite of what we expected. They're the ones that keep saying, you need to open this up. People need to see this. It's a fascination. But we've had Israelis say to us, this is the first time I've ever felt access to him as a personality. You have made him one of us within our own suffering, which...
That's a powerful expression of, attachment, to what they see in front of them. And, we'll definitely bring a group your way, because this is very... good. You never think on the backside of Arad, what is here but the wilderness and the desert?
Yeah.
But we've seen life coming alive through Jewish history. And thank you so much, Rick.
You're welcome.